There comes a moment in life when everything that was lost, every dream, every promise, every blessing that seemed buried under generations of struggle, begins to cry out for restoration. And that voice is not yours alone. There's a voice older, stronger, and eternal, the blood that speaks. When the blood speaks, it doesn't plead weakness. It declares victory, covenant, and recovery. Before the foundations of the earth, a covenant was established. A covenant sealed not with ink, not with stone, but with blood that speaks beyond time and generations. This blood doesn't whisper of defeat. It proclaims redemption, recovery, and divine inheritance. When the blood speaks, it doesn't just speak for one generation. It speaks for every generation that came before and every one that will follow after. It speaks to restore what the enemy has scattered, to rebuild what time has eroded, and to recover what unbelief once surrendered. You see, there are moments when heaven responds not to your cry, but to covenant language, the language of the blood. Every promise God made to your fathers, every blessing intended for your lineage, every destiny that seemed delayed, all are encoded within that blood. And when you stand in faith, not as a beggar, but as a covenant heir, that blood begins to testify on your behalf. It says, this one has a right to recovery. It says, this family shall no longer live under lack. It says, this generation shall walk in abundance, wisdom, and divine favor. Generational wealth is not simply about money. It's about the restoration of divine order. Wealth in its purest form is wholeness, health, peace, resources, and legacy. It's the manifestation of God's covenant faithfulness across time. But the enemy has used ignorance, fear, and unbelief to sever families from their inheritance. That's why you must understand, your first battle is not with the world's economy, but with your mindset. Until your spirit aligns with what the blood has declared, you will continue to think as though you are still in debt to what Christ already paid in full. When the blood speaks, it calls you back to remembrance, to the covenant that cannot be annulled. It summons you to walk in revelation, not repetition. Revelation is what turns a believer into a restorer. When you receive revelation that the covenant includes generational wealth recovery, you stop chasing blessings and start activating inheritance. You no longer ask, will God do it? You begin to declare, it is finished. Because faith doesn't beg, faith enforces. The blood of the covenant gives you legal ground in the courtroom of heaven. Every accusation that has stood against your family's name, every limitation that said, you can't go further than this, begins to crumble under the sound of that blood. The blood is not silent, it's active. It speaks restoration into dead businesses, favor into forgotten callings, wisdom into confused minds, and provision into barren lands. When you agree with it, your confession becomes a courtroom decree, and heaven enforces what the blood has already spoken. Generational wealth recovery begins when one person in a lineage awakens to revelation. That person becomes the repairer of the breach, the bridge between what was lost and what is now being restored. And if you're hearing this message today, you are that person. You are the one chosen to stand in the gap, to reclaim covenant promises, and to carry the sound of the blood into your generation. The same covenant that empowered Abraham, enriched Isaac, and established Jacob is alive in you. You are not the end of your bloodline's story. You are the turning point. When you begin to walk in obedience, in faith, in tithing, in stewardship, in generosity, the blood speaks louder than poverty, louder than fear, louder than every generational limitation. Heaven recognizes your alignment, and what once took generations to build begins to accelerate under divine favor. Restoration doesn't come because you cry, it comes because you agree. You agree with what the blood says. You agree that you are an heir, not a victim. You agree that recovery isn't coming, it has begun. So today, lift your voice not in complaint, but in covenant declaration. Let the blood speak for your family, your finances, your destiny. For when the blood speaks, restoration answers, inheritance awakens, and generational wealth is not just recovered, it multiplies. Before time began, before the foundations of the world were laid, a covenant was written in eternity's ink, sealed not with the frailty of man's promise, but with the unbreakable power of divine blood. That blood is not silent. It carries a voice that echoes through generations, calling forth restoration, recovery, and redemption for those who believe. When the blood speaks, creation responds. It speaks louder than the failures of your ancestors, louder than the debts and losses that crippled your family line, louder than every curse spoken in ignorance or rebellion. It is the eternal testimony that what was once lost can be recovered, and what was once broken can be restored. The blood speaks to the hidden parts of your inheritance, summoning them back into alignment with divine intention. It calls forth the wealth that has been buried under fear, shame, and unbelief, commanding it to return to the rightful heirs of the covenant. Every generation that walked in lack did so because they forgot the covenant voice of the blood. But when revelation dawns, chains break. The blood does not beg for your restoration, it declares it. It does not request permission to bless, it enforces divine justice. Generational wealth is not merely about possessions or property. It is about divine order being restored to the lineage of faith. True wealth is wholeness, health in your body, peace in your home, wisdom in your mind, and abundance in your life. It is the reflection of heaven's resources operating through human hands to fulfill divine purpose. The enemy has fought families for centuries not because of their weaknesses, but because of their potential inheritance. He knows that once revelation meets obedience, restoration becomes unstoppable. That is why ignorance has been the strongest weapon of darkness, because where there is no knowledge of covenant, there can be no recovery of wealth. But when the blood speaks, it pierces ignorance and releases understanding. It reveals that wealth is not an achievement, it is a covenant right. You are not called to chase money, you are called to manifest kingdom abundance. Every believer who understands this truth becomes a carrier of restoration, a vessel through which heaven reclaims what the enemy has stolen. The blood speaks on legal grounds. It testifies in the courts of heaven that your name, your family, and your future are under divine ownership. Every accusation that poverty, sickness, and limitation have brought against your household must bow to the testimony of that blood. When you align your words with what the blood declares, your confession becomes a decree, and heaven enforces it. Your faith activates what the covenant already purchased. You don't earn it through struggle, you enforce it through belief. You don't try to persuade God to do what He has already finished. You step into what has already been provided. The blood is not speaking about tomorrow. It speaks of a finished reality that exists now. Generational wealth recovery is not an event to wait for, but a revelation to walk in. The moment you recognize the covenant voice, restoration begins to move through your lineage like a river returning to its source. It flows through your mind, renewing your thinking, through your heart, cleansing your motives, through your hands, blessing the work you do. And as that revelation grows, you begin to live not as one trying to survive, but as one chosen to rebuild. You become the bridge between what your ancestors lost and what your descendants will inherit. The blood empowers you to rewrite the story of your family line, turning scarcity into sufficiency, failure into fruitfulness, and delay into divine acceleration. You begin to speak differently, think differently, and act differently because the blood has awakened your covenant consciousness. Heaven now recognizes your voice because it carries the sound of agreement with the blood. When you tithe, when you give, when you obey divine instruction, you are not performing rituals. You are honoring covenant. Every act of obedience becomes a key that unlocks what the blood already secured. The supernatural begins to flow into natural systems. Contracts, opportunities, relationships, and resources start aligning under the authority of that voice. The blood does not operate on emotion, it operates on faith. And when faith connects with that divine sound, recovery accelerates beyond what generations before you could imagine. You are not a victim of generational patterns. You are the evidence of generational redemption. The blood has already spoken your recovery into being, and heaven is waiting for your agreement. So rise up, not in fear, but in faith. Speak not as one trying to earn favor, but as one enforcing covenant. Let your words carry the power of what the blood proclaims, that your lineage is blessed, your future is restored, and your inheritance is secure. The blood still speaks, and its message has not changed. You are redeemed. You are restored, and everything that belongs to your divine lineage is being returned, multiplied, and established for the glory of God. Before the beginning of time, before man ever drew breath, there was a covenant established in the eternal realm, sealed with the blood that carries divine authority and power. That blood was not shed in vain. It carries a voice that transcends generations, speaking life into what was dead and summoning restoration into what was lost. When the blood speaks, it calls creation to attention. It commands what belongs to the covenant people to return to its rightful place. There are moments in life when everything that has been scattered, opportunities, inheritance, favor, begins to respond to that voice. It is not a cry of desperation, it is the sound of divine enforcement. That blood does not whisper weakness, it shouts redemption. It testifies that poverty has no legal claim over your lineage, that sickness has no authority over your destiny, and that lack has no voice in your future. When the blood speaks, it reminds heaven and earth that every curse that once bound your family has been broken. Generational wealth is not a random blessing. It is the result of divine order restored through revelation. For too long, people have labored under the weight of ignorance, unaware that their inheritance was already secured by covenant. They have tried to earn what has already been freely given, pleading for favor when favor was already their birthright. But when revelation comes, the eyes of understanding open, and suddenly you realize you are not fighting to possess wealth. You are awakening to what the blood already declared as yours. The blood has been speaking throughout history, calling families back to divine alignment, calling generations out of limitation, and calling wealth out of hidden places. It speaks through faith-filled words, through acts of obedience, and through covenant remembrance. Every time you declare, "I am redeemed," the blood answers yes, and restoration is your portion. Every time you act on faith, that blood bears witness that your lineage is not forsaken but favored. It demands restoration where loss once ruled and releases increase where lack once lived. The blood does not plead your case in silence, it speaks with authority. And when you come into agreement with it, the heavens respond. Your life becomes a testimony that covenant promises are not broken by time, and that what was lost in one generation can be recovered in the next when faith meets revelation. The blood's power is not bound by circumstance, and its voice cannot be silenced by history. When you choose to align your mind and heart with what the blood declares, you begin to function from a higher law, a law of restoration, abundance, and divine recovery. This is not the wealth of greed or vanity. It is the wealth of purpose, designed to establish righteousness and reveal God's faithfulness through you. Generational wealth recovery begins when one person in a family decides to believe differently, to speak differently, to live differently. That one decision becomes a turning point for generations yet unborn. The blood empowers you to reclaim what ignorance surrendered and to rebuild what disobedience destroyed. It awakens a sense of divine responsibility. You realize you are not just living for yourself, but as a representative of a redeemed lineage. Every seed you sow, every act of faith you take, every word of truth you speak becomes a link in the chain of generational restoration. The same covenant that elevated Abraham, multiplied Isaac, and preserved Jacob still speaks today through the blood that sealed it. That blood declares that your covenant rights include health, provision, and peace. It declares that wealth is not just the abundance of possessions, but the presence of divine wholeness. And when your faith aligns with that truth, your life begins to manifest heaven's economy on earth. You no longer see giving as loss, but as activation. You no longer see work as struggle, but as assignment. You no longer see lack as your portion, but as a lie that can no longer stand against covenant truth. The blood speaks through your obedience, through your worship, through your faith, commanding the restoration of what the enemy stole. When you stand in that authority, everything that was lost in your family line, dreams, wisdom, property, influence, begins to find its way back home. The blood is still speaking now, not just to your spirit, but to your future. It speaks of a recovery that cannot be stopped, of blessings that cannot be reversed, and a favor that cannot be denied. It speaks that you are the one chosen to carry the restoration mantle for your generation, the one who turns lack into legacy and loss into abundance. The blood still speaks, and when it does, every force of darkness must yield to the sound of redemption, for its voice is stronger than history, louder than failure, and eternal in power. Before the dawn of creation, before the first breath of humanity, a covenant was established, eternal and unshakable, sealed not by human agreement, but by divine blood that carries authority beyond time and space. That blood speaks a language the earth must obey and the heavens must honor. It carries the sound of restoration, redemption, and recovery that no darkness can silence. When the blood speaks, every injustice must be corrected, every curse must bow, and every loss must be repaid. It calls out across generations, summoning back everything that rightfully belongs to the children of covenant. It doesn't speak of defeat or despair. It speaks of fulfillment, wholeness, and divine inheritance. Generations may have walked in lack, forgotten promises, or abandoned dreams, but when the blood speaks, it awakens those dormant blessings and commands them to manifest again. This is the power that reclaims what was stolen by ignorance and restores what unbelief once surrendered. The blood declares that you are not a victim of your family's past, but an heir of an eternal promise. Its voice echoes through your lineage, breaking cycles of lack and establishing divine wealth as your covenant right. It testifies that what was meant for destruction will now be turned for your good. The moment you recognize that the blood still speaks for you, your perspective changes. You stop pleading for blessings and start walking in the authority of what has already been decreed. The blood's power is not limited by generations or geography. It transcends family histories, economic systems, and cultural boundaries. When you awaken to its reality, you realize that generational wealth recovery is not a dream. It is a divine transaction already completed in the spirit, waiting for your faith to activate it in the natural. Wealth is not simply money. It is the manifestation of divine order in every area of life. It is wisdom in decisions, peace in relationships, health in body, and provision in resources. True wealth is not accumulation, it is covenant alignment. The blood restores that alignment by reminding creation that the believer stands in covenant with the Almighty. Every time you speak in agreement with what the blood has declared, you activate the law of restoration. Every word of faith becomes a decree that heaven recognizes and enforces. When you say, "I am redeemed," the blood answers, "Yes," and everything connected to you is being restored. Heaven operates by sound, and the blood carries the highest frequency of divine authority. It speaks louder than fear, louder than generational debt, louder than every lie that says you are not enough. As you align your thoughts and actions with that truth, the economy of heaven begins to flow through you, making the impossible possible. You become a conduit of generational blessing, a living testimony that divine wealth is not inherited by chance but by covenant. The blood speaks of abundance that multiplies through obedience, not greed. It speaks of wealth that carries purpose, to build, to bless, and to break the chains of limitation for others. Once this revelation captures your heart, you begin to walk with quiet confidence, knowing that heaven's resources are already assigned to your obedience. When the blood speaks, everything begins to shift. The atmosphere of lack gives way to the sound of abundance. Closed doors open, forgotten opportunities reappear, and what was lost is found again. You realize that you are the chosen vessel for restoration in your generation, the one through whom the blood will demonstrate its power. Every seed of faith you sow carries generational impact because it is backed by the eternal testimony of the blood. The more you honor that covenant with obedience, integrity, and faith, the more the heavens release what was once held back. Generational wealth recovery is not about receiving alone. It is about restoring divine purpose to your lineage. It is about ensuring that what flows to you also flows through you. You become a channel of divine justice, reversing the curses of scarcity and birthing a legacy of abundance. The blood continues to speak, and every time you align your words with it, your life becomes a reflection of redemption's sound. It speaks through your generosity, your prayer, your faith, and your perseverance. It rebuilds what time destroyed and multiplies what the enemy divided. Even in seasons of waiting, the blood's voice does not grow silent. It continues to declare your restoration. It proclaims that you are not forgotten but favored, not empty but overflowing, not broken but whole. The blood still speaks, and its message remains the same. The covenant is eternal, the inheritance is secure, and the recovery of your generational wealth is not a possibility. It is a divine certainty written in the language of victory that only the blood can speak. Before creation was spoken into existence, before man ever opened his eyes to behold light, a covenant was established by the will of the eternal, sealed with blood that speaks beyond time, nations, and generations. That blood holds the sound of divine authority, a language creation must respond to. When the blood speaks, everything in heaven and earth listens. It does not plead for mercy, it proclaims redemption. It does not beg for restoration, it commands it. The blood carries the testimony of victory, of wealth, of wholeness, of everything once promised to those who stand in covenant. For generations, people have walked beneath the shadow of loss, believing their inheritance was lost to time, buried under the weight of failure and fear. Yet, when the blood speaks, it calls out to the hidden treasures of destiny and commands them to return. It does not recognize defeat, nor does it yield to limitation. Its sound pierces through curses, confusion, and captivity, declaring that every covenant promise must rise again. The blood carries memory. It remembers every word spoken by the Creator and refuses to let it fall to the ground unfulfilled. Every time the blood speaks, it reinforces divine justice, demanding the return of what was stolen, the healing of what was broken, and the restoration of what was forgotten. Generational wealth recovery begins not with labor, but with revelation. You cannot reclaim what you do not recognize. The blood reveals that wealth is not simply material gain. It is the manifestation of divine order, prosperity of mind, health of body, strength of spirit, and abundance in purpose. The blood calls every area of your life back into alignment with heaven's design. It reminds creation that covenant heirs are not beggars, but possessors of divine inheritance. You have not been called to chase riches, but to walk in revelation, knowing that everything you need has already been provided through covenant promise. The blood speaks into your family line, canceling generational debts, breaking cycles of lack, and commanding favor to flow again. It speaks to the land, the work of your hands, the fruit of your labor, and the generations that follow after you. Every word spoken by the blood carries creative power, and when your faith agrees with it, restoration becomes inevitable. Heaven does not move by emotion, but by alignment. And when you align with the covenant voice of the blood, supernatural recovery begins to manifest in the natural realm. The blood's testimony cannot be challenged because it stands on the finished work of redemption. It bears witness that your name is written in a covenant of abundance, that your future is secured in divine provision, and that your destiny carries the signature of eternal victory. When the blood speaks, it transforms how you see yourself and how you engage with the world. You no longer operate as one who hopes to survive. You live as one who has already overcome. The blood gives you access to the courts of heaven, where every accusation against your lineage is overruled by the power of redemption. It testifies that your family is no longer bound by limitation or lack, but released into divine inheritance. It speaks restoration over forgotten callings, lost opportunities, and broken dreams. It speaks favor into every place your foot shall tread. Every time you speak words of faith, the blood amplifies them, turning declarations into decrees that heaven must enforce. The sound of the blood is unstoppable. It travels through generations, awakening destiny in children not yet born, breaking barriers that held ancestors captive, and creating a path of prosperity for those yet to come. It is not the sound of religion, but of relationship, not the echo of ritual, but the language of covenant power. It calls you to live differently, to think differently, to act as one who understands the value of inheritance. The blood turns ordinary moments into divine appointments, transforming effort into favor and labor into legacy. You are not the end of your family's story. You are the evidence of divine recovery. The blood chose you to be the bridge between what was lost and what will now be restored. You are the one who carries the voice of the covenant into your generation. Every act of faith you perform, every seed you sow, every prayer you speak, becomes a vessel through which the blood releases restoration. It builds what time tried to destroy, multiplies what the enemy divided, and strengthens what weakness once consumed. The blood speaks even when you feel unworthy, reminding heaven that your worth is not in your perfection, but in your covenant position. It does not see you through the lens of your past, but through the promise of divine inheritance. When you walk in obedience, when you honor the covenant with faith and integrity, heaven begins to pour out resources that cannot be contained. Generational wealth recovery becomes more than a promise. It becomes your living reality. You begin to see doors open that were closed to your ancestors, opportunities rise that no one before you could access, and favor follow you in every season. The blood still speaks, and its voice is as powerful now as it was in the beginning. It declares that you are redeemed, restored, and ready to carry generational abundance, not as a receiver alone, but as a vessel through which divine wealth flows to impact nations, transform lives, and glorify the one who made the covenant eternal. Before the first dawn broke across the horizon of creation, before time began to move and man took his first breath, there was a covenant sealed with blood that carried eternal power and divine remembrance. That blood was not silent. It spoke then, and it still speaks now. It carries a voice that creation cannot ignore, a sound that heaven recognizes and hell fears. It proclaims redemption over every generation, declaring that what was lost must be restored and what was broken must be healed. When the blood speaks, it reminds all of creation that divine justice cannot be denied. It is the sound of covenant authority, echoing through generations, calling blessings back into alignment and commanding everything that drifted from purpose to return. It speaks louder than failure, louder than lack, louder than every curse that has ever attached itself to a family line. Its voice penetrates through time, summoning back generational inheritance that was buried under unbelief and forgotten promises. The blood's voice is eternal because it carries the testimony of divine completion. It does not speak of what might happen, but of what has already been secured. Every person born into covenant stands beneath the power of that voice, but many live unaware of its reality. Generational wealth is not merely the accumulation of possessions, it is the restoration of divine order. The blood speaks to every dimension of human life, spiritual, emotional, physical, and financial, calling it into harmony with heaven's design. Wealth, in the eyes of the covenant, is not greed or self-promotion, but stewardship and fulfillment of divine purpose. When you understand this truth, you stop striving to create abundance through human effort and start aligning yourself with what the blood has already declared. The blood carries the legal right of your inheritance. It testifies before heaven that everything the covenant promised belongs to you. It speaks of recovery for what was lost by your ancestors, of redemption for what was wasted, and of restoration for what was taken. The moment faith responds to that voice, the cycle of loss is broken. The blood does not beg for your restoration, it enforces it. It demands that every curse, every limitation, every delay that has lingered over your lineage bow to the authority of divine covenant. It calls you to remember that wealth is not produced by toil alone, but by revelation. When the blood speaks, it challenges your mindset before it changes your circumstance. It transforms how you see yourself, from a struggler in need to an heir with rights. The language of the blood is covenant, and that language does not speak of lack. It says you have been given the power to produce wealth, the wisdom to manage it, and the purpose to multiply it for generations to come. The blood awakens the dormant faith inside you, stirring the awareness that divine inheritance cannot be forfeited by time or lineage. It can only be neglected through ignorance. Once revelation enters your heart, faith becomes the bridge between divine provision and earthly manifestation. The blood strengthens that bridge, ensuring that what belongs to your family's destiny will no longer remain locked away in potential, but will manifest in reality. It commands restoration in the spiritual realm first, transforming your thinking and your speaking, because heaven responds to faith-filled agreement. Every time you declare what the blood has already said, you activate restoration. Every act of obedience, every seed of faith, every moment of worship becomes an instrument that carries the sound of that voice. As the blood continues to speak, it establishes divine order in places that once carried chaos. It rebuilds what unbelief destroyed and resurrects what doubt buried. Generational wealth recovery is not just a financial concept, it is the restoration of divine design, where each generation builds upon the faith of the last. When the blood speaks, you become a carrier of that restoration. You are chosen to repair the breach between what was lost and what is being restored. Your life becomes a living testimony that covenant blessings do not expire. The blood empowers you to rise above the limitations that held your ancestors captive. It gives you strength to take spiritual authority over every area where the enemy claimed ownership. You begin to see doors open that were shut to those before you. Opportunities rise from forgotten places, and favor flow in ways that cannot be explained by human reasoning. The blood speaks into your labor, multiplying the fruit of your effort. It speaks into your relationships, birthing peace and unity where there was division. It speaks into your legacy, ensuring that your children inherit more than material wealth. They inherit covenant consciousness. The blood still speaks, and its voice is as powerful now as it was when the covenant was first established. It calls you not only to receive restoration, but to become a vessel of it. You are not meant to live as one merely redeemed, but as one commissioned to carry generational blessing. The blood declares that you are the continuation of a divine story, that your lineage has been chosen to demonstrate the abundance and glory of covenant living. Every time you stand in faith, you amplify its voice on the earth. Every time you obey divine instruction, you open the gates for wealth and wisdom to flow through you. The blood has already decreed your restoration, and heaven has already confirmed it. It proclaims that lack has lost its power, that delay has reached its end, and that the season of recovery has begun. The blood's voice does not fade. It grows stronger in those who believe. And as you walk in that revelation, you become the living proof that the covenant still stands, that restoration is possible, and that generational wealth recovery is not a dream of the future, but a divine reality unfolding in your life now.